Hi everyone, welcome back to our Histo PH family, where forgotten Filipino history finally comes alive. Today we're diving deep into the untold story of ancient Philippine civilization, a story that rewrites everything we thought we knew about our beginnings. Before the Spanish galleons ever touched Philippine shores, before Magellan's fatal encounter with Lapu-Lapu, before the cross was planted on Cebu's beaches, the Philippine archipelago was home to one of the most sophisticated maritime civilizations in Southeast Asia. This isn't the story they taught you in school. This is the story of kingdoms that traded with emperors, warriors whose tattoos told tales of countless victories, ships that conquered the Pacific, and a golden age that lasted for centuries before it was deliberately erased from history books. Let me take you back to the year 900 AD. While Europe was stumbling through the Dark Ages, a copper plate was being inscribed in the Kingdom of Tondo in what is now Metro Manila. This wasn't just any copper plate. The Laguna copper plate inscription, as archaeologists would later call it, was a legal document that pardoned a man named Namwaran from his debt. But the significance goes far deeper than a simple debt forgiveness. This document was written in a mixture of Old Malay, Old Javanese, and Sanskrit, using an ancient script that predated Spanish colonization by over 600 years. It mentioned specific dates according to the Saka calendar, referenced complex social hierarchies, and named multiple settlements and rulers. This single artifact shattered the colonial narrative that Filipinos were primitive tribes without written language or sophisticated governance. The Kingdom of Tondo wasn't alone. Across the archipelago, powerful states rose and fell, traded and warred, built and created. The Rajahnate of Butuan in Mindanao was constructing ships that would make European vessels look like bathtubs. These weren't simple boats. The barangay, as they were called, were masterpieces of naval engineering. Built without a single metal nail, held together by wooden pegs and plant fiber lashings, these ships could carry up to 90 people and tons of cargo across open ocean. Archaeological evidence shows that Butuan's shipwrights understood principles of hydrodynamics that European shipbuilders wouldn't grasp for centuries. If you're amazed by our ancestors, the untold story of ancient Philippine civilization, help us hit our 500-like goal. Drop a comment about your favorite fact and subscribe to join the Histo PH family. The barangay's design allowed it to ride waves rather than fight them, making it faster and more stable than comparable vessels of its time. And these ships didn't just sail around the islands. They crossed the South China Sea, traded in Borneo, Java, and the Moluccas, and some evidence suggests they may have reached as far as Madagascar and the east coast of Africa. But what were they trading? Gold. Massive amounts of gold. When Spanish conquistadors first arrived, they were stunned by the amount of gold jewelry worn by even common Filipinos. Ancient gold artifacts recovered from burial sites show craftsmanship that rivals anything produced in Europe during the same period. Gold death masks with intricate facial features, gold sashes that weighed several kilograms, gold rings, bracelets, and anklets adorned with detailed geometric patterns and representations of Hindu-Buddhist deities. The Surigao treasure, discovered in the 1980s, contained gold artifacts dating from the 10th to the 13th centuries that demonstrated sophisticated metalworking techniques including granulation, filigree, and repoussé work. These weren't simple trinkets hammered out by primitive craftsmen. These were works of art that required specialized knowledge, dedicated workshops, and established trade networks to acquire the raw materials. Speaking of trade networks, the pre-colonial Philippines sat at the crossroads of Asian maritime commerce. Chinese traders called regularly at Philippine ports, exchanging silk, porcelain, and metal goods for Philippine gold, pearls, exotic woods, and agricultural products. Archaeological excavations across the archipelago have uncovered Chinese ceramics from the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties. Not just a few pieces, but thousands of ceramic jars, plates, and bowls that were so common they were used as everyday household items. The volume of Chinese porcelain found in Philippine archaeological sites is so substantial that it indicates regular, sustained trade relationships spanning centuries. These weren't occasional visits by lost traders. This was systematic, profitable commerce between established trading partners. Indian influence permeated Philippine culture as well. The Laguna copperplate inscriptions' use of Sanskrit terminology, the prevalence of Hindu-Buddhist iconography in gold artifacts, and the adoption of Indian scripts all point to extensive contact with South Asian merchants and possibly even Indian immigrants who settled in the Philippines. The concept of the Raja, the hierarchical social structure, certain religious practices, and even some linguistic elements all show Indian influence. This wasn't colonization in the European sense. This was cultural exchange between sophisticated civilizations that recognized mutual benefit in trade and interaction. Now let's talk about the warriors, the men who would terrify Spanish conquistadors and make the Philippines the most difficult territory Spain ever attempted to control. In the Visayan Islands, warriors underwent a transformation that was equal parts art, spirituality, and resume building. They called them Los Pintados, the painted ones, but the Spanish misunderstood what they were seeing. These weren't paintings, they were tattoos, and every single mark on a warrior's body told a story written in blood and battle. The system was elegant in its brutality. Kill an enemy in combat, earn a tattoo. The placement and design of tattoos indicated rank, achievements, and status. A warrior with tattoos only on his hands and arms was respectable, but still proving himself. A warrior with tattoos covering his torso had demonstrated consistent valor. But a warrior covered head to toe in intricate geometric patterns with ink on his face, neck, even his tongue and eyelids, was a walking legend. These men had killed dozens, perhaps hundreds of enemies. They were the special forces of their time, and their mere appearance in battle could cause enemy forces to break and run. The tattooing process itself was a test of worthiness. Using citrus thorns or sharpened bones as needles with soot and plant-based inks, the tattooist would work for hours or even days to complete a single design. There was no anesthesia, no pain relief. A warrior who flinched or cried out during the process brought shame upon himself. Many died from infections before they could display their earned tattoos in battle. But those who survived carried permanent proof of their courage, skill, and status. And there was another dimension to these tattoos that the Spanish could never understand. The Visayans believed that tattoos made you beautiful in the afterlife. A person who died without tattoos would arrive in the spirit world as a slave, naked and unmarked. The tattoos you earned in life determined your status in eternity. So every battle, every kill, every painful session under the tattooist's needle was an investment in eternal glory. These tattooed warriors wielded weapons that shocked the Spanish with their effectiveness. The Campilan sword was unlike anything European soldiers had encountered. While Spanish rapiers and side swords were designed for thrusting and quick cuts in one-on-one duels, the Campilan was an instrument of devastation on the battlefield. 3 to 4 feet of carbon steel, wider at the tip than at the base, designed specifically for massive downward cleaving strikes. Spanish accounts describe Campilan-wielding warriors cutting through helmets, armor, and even the legs of horses with single strikes. If you're still here, you're one of the rare few who truly care about the real origins of the untold story of ancient Philippine civilization, not just the visuals, but the truth behind them. The weapon's design concentrated kinetic energy at the impact point, and warriors trained from childhood to generate maximum force through full-body rotation. A properly executed Campilan strike could split a man from shoulder to hip, even through metal armor. Spanish soldiers found their fencing techniques useless against these massive overhead attacks, and Filipino warriors often fought with 2 Campilans simultaneously, spinning and striking in patterns that created zones of death that Spanish infantry couldn't penetrate. But the Philippines wasn't just about warfare. The archipelago was home to complex political structures that governed trade, resolved disputes, and maintained social order. The Sultanate of Sulu, established in the 15th century, controlled vast maritime territories and maintained diplomatic relations with China, Borneo, and other Southeast Asian powers. The Sultan of Sulu wasn't a tribal chief making decisions around a campfire. He was a sophisticated ruler presiding over a bureaucratic state with established laws, tax systems, and diplomatic protocols. When the Spanish arrived, they had to negotiate with Sulu, as they would with any other sovereign nation, because Sulu had the military and economic power to resist Spanish expansion for centuries. The Rajanati of Cebu, ruled by Raja Humabon when Magellan arrived, was another example of advanced political organization. Humabon didn't grovel before the Spanish. He negotiated as an equal, weighing the benefits of alliance against the costs, making strategic decisions about which foreign power to support in local conflicts. The famous blood compact between Humabon and Spanish representatives wasn't a native submitting to superior foreigners. It was a diplomatic ritual between sovereign powers establishing terms of alliance. Only when Lapu-Lapu, the chief of nearby Mactan, decided that Spanish presence violated his sovereignty did conflict erupt. And we all know how that ended. Magellan died on a Philippine beach, killed by warriors whose supposed primitiveness hadn't prevented them from recognizing imperialism when they saw it. The babaylan deserve their own recognition in this story. These were the spiritual leaders, healers, and advisors of pre-colonial Philippine society, and most of them were women. In a time when European women had virtually no political or religious authority, babaylan in the Philippines wielded enormous power. They communicated with spirits, conducted healing rituals, advised chiefs on important decisions, and maintained the oral traditions that preserved community history. The Spanish were deeply disturbed by the authority these women held. Catholic missionaries specifically targeted the babaylan in their conversion efforts because they recognized that as long as these women maintained their influence, Spanish cultural domination would be incomplete. Many babaylan were persecuted, their practices condemned as witchcraft, their authority deliberately undermined. The suppression of the babaylan tradition represents one of the great cultural losses of colonization, a dimension of gender equality and female empowerment that was centuries ahead of European norms. Let's address the writing systems. The Babayan script, used across much of the Philippines before Spanish colonization, was an alpha-syllabary derived from ancient Indian scripts. Each character represented a consonant-vowel combination, with diacritical marks modifying the vowel sound. Filipinos inscribed Baybayin on bamboo, palm leaves, and bark using knives and styluses. The perishable nature of these materials means few examples survived, but Spanish accounts confirm that writing was widespread among the population. Early Spanish missionaries noted with surprise that literacy rates in the Philippines were actually higher than in Spain itself. Common people could read and write, correspondence was conducted in Baybayin, and written records were kept of debts, agreements, and genealogies. The Spanish banned Baybayin and mandated the use of the Latin alphabet as part of their cultural colonization program. Within a few generations, knowledge of the indigenous script was nearly lost, surviving only in remote areas and among communities that resisted Spanish control. The economic systems of pre-colonial Philippines were equally sophisticated. The concept of the alipin, often mistranslated as slave, was actually a complex form of economic obligation and social stratification. Alipin weren't property that could be bought and sold arbitrarily. They were individuals who owed labor or tribute to someone of higher status, often as payment for debt, or as a result of capture in war. But alipin had rights. They could own property, marry freely, and their obligations were legally defined and limited. An alipin could pay off their debt and regain full free status. Their children weren't automatically alipin unless they inherited specific debts. The system was more similar to European serfdom or indentured servitude than to the chattel slavery that Europeans practiced in the Americas. The distinction matters because it demonstrates that pre-colonial Philippine society had developed nuanced economic and social structures that balanced individual obligations with individual rights. Trade regulations in major ports like Manila, Cebu, and Butuan were codified and enforced. Merchants paid harbor fees, disputes were adjudicated according to established precedents, and weights and measures were standardized to prevent fraud. When Chinese merchants arrived with their junks full of goods, they weren't entering lawless pirate havens. They were docking at established ports with harbors masters, customs officials, and commercial regulations that protected both buyers and sellers. The volume and regularity of this trade indicates that Philippine merchants understood concepts like contract law, property rights, and commercial dispute resolution. Our ancestors' stories don't end here. They're just waiting to be rediscovered. Smash that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to join the HistoPH family for the next epic chapter of our forgotten history.